Good afternoon to everyone on the line, and welcome to the April 12 Points webinar, Megatrends, Own the Future. And we are going to get started here in just about 2 minutes as we let everyone gather. So we're going to put you on hold for just a couple of minutes, and we will be back in just about 2. Thank you, everyone.
So on my end, my camera is glitching a little bit, so hopefully the audience doesn't think I'm an AI presenting to them. But we'll have some fun and learn about thematic investing today. I'm excited to be here, even if my screen looks a little crazy.
All right, well, looks like we have the majority of people who signed up here with us already, so we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us for the April 12 Points webinar. We are, if you don't know who I am, I'm Dave Clayman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of 12 Points, so thank you all for joining us. And we are thrilled to have Anna Neris from BlackRock join us on the line here. Anna's been with BlackRock for about 7 years now, and she is a product specialist, and she's going to take us through our discussion about megatrends and how to own the future. So Anna, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you with one last caveat. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will monitor the chat, and we'll go through some of the questions with Anna as they come up.
Awesome. Dave, thanks so much for the kind introduction, and thank you to you and the group at 12 Points Wealth Management for having me. I'm very excited to be here to talk about my favorite subject. Now, granted, I'm a little biased as a thematic strategist, thinking about what changes are we seeing around the world and how do we potentially invest in them. So that's going to be the topic of today's presentation. If you're wondering what the word megatrends means, let's maybe start there. I mean, we live in a world of so much constant change, but there's different types of change. What we mean when we refer to these things called megatrends is structural shifts in the way that we live and work and the way that businesses make decisions and governments operate. But you know, there's also maybe more short-term trends that can pop up and change things, but they may differ in a few ways. So on the slides here, I have a squiggly black line, which is what I think of as cyclical trends. Cyclical trends, they're short-term by nature. They often last days, maybe weeks, maybe at best months, and they're typically driven forward by a single distinct catalyst. So a cyclical trend, an example would be a rise in the healthcare sector due to medical legislation, or a change in the price of commodities due to inflation. The thing that's tricky about cyclical themes is that these kind of trends, they rise as quickly as they fall. And so timing them is both incredibly important and incredibly challenging. Now, structural trends, as evidenced by this kind of long sloping green line, they're long-term by nature. They take years to play out, and they're often, unlike cyclical themes, driven forward by multiple catalysts at the same time. So we're talking about societal shifts, long-term government regulation, technological and economic advancements. And very often when we look back through time, there are these structural trends in history that almost felt kind of inevitable because they were so powerful, and over a number of years, they could deliver significant returns to investors who took the right approach to owning them. But because structural trends are so powerful, it's not really that timing them is the trick. It's actually just really keeping your eyes open and watching the trends that are changing the world around us and investing in them broadly rather than narrowly. So as you might have guessed, megatrends by nature, they are structural. They are really obvious, I think, when you think about it. And I'll go through these 5 buckets really quickly. This is how we at BlackRock have organized a lot of these long-term trends. And you can see they range pretty widely. So something like technological breakthrough, that's really about sub-themes like cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. That's a big one. Last 2 years, I think that's probably the 1 theme I've talked about. But it also includes things that maybe are a little more surprising to folks. Demographics. Oh, sorry. Let me cancel that call. Demographics, rapid urbanization, climate change, and resource scarcity. These also have a number of sub-themes that are played into using technological breakthroughs and economic advancements, but kind of sit in their own distinct realms. So today's presentation is certainly going to be about these mega trends and the future, but I think before we get there, it might be helpful to take a little time machine back through history and look at some of the most powerful structural shifts of the past 100 years to kind of better frame where we're going. So, okay, we're in this time machine. We are going back to the turn of the 20th century when one of the most common forms of transportation was the horse and carriage. Our roads, our cities, like they were all built for that form of transportation. And to share a personal story, my grandmother, who was living in rural Eastern Europe, she didn't see a car for the first time until she was about 12 years old. And when she did, her first thought was, okay, well, where the heck is the horse for this really noisy carriage? And we fast forward, and we all know today that the horse and carriage was replaced by the car. And amazingly, it only took 25 years for it to fully do that. And I'd like to think that, thinking back to my grandmother, like that she or any other investor probably could have recognized that this was a technology that was going to change everything, even if it was a little bit scary to them at the time. But how would she, if she was an investor, know which of the companies of the time in this new evolving space were ultimately going to be the ones who prospered? Believe it or not, when we look back, there are over 1,000 defunct car manufacturers, the vast majority of which were shuttered by around the 1920s. So that's the potential for a lot of bad investments, even though the theme, cars taking over for horse and buggy, was correct. And we also know now, and with the benefit of hindsight, that there are a lot of names that were around then that are still around today. Think about Michelin, Goodyear, Ford, GM even. And so those are not necessarily just car manufacturers. It's actually car ecosystem supporters as well. Now, if we move in this time machine a little bit further and we come to post-World War II and 1946, believe it or not, only 1 in 10,000 American households had a television. And in 12 years, just 12 years, about half the time it took for the car to knock off the horse, 4 out of 5 American households had a television. Once again, it wasn't necessarily just TV manufacturers that benefited from this large movement. It was actually a lot of content providers, NBC, ABC, CBS, as well as advertisers who moved from kind of supporting regional firms to building out national brands and reaching millions of Americans through their living room television. Again, the trend, powerful, easy to spot, but the investment implications were spread over a wide variety of different companies. Now, you probably can see where I'm going with this. We know it took 25 years for the car to be the dominant form of transportation. We know it took about 12 years for the television, about 7 years roughly for the internet to be fully commercialized, about 4 years, moving up more recently through time, for Facebook to reach 100 million users. If you have anyone in your household under the age of 16, you've probably heard about TikTok. Only took TikTok 2 years to reach 500 million users. And so the pattern is clear. Even these long-term structural opportunities, because of the pace of technological innovation and adoption, are playing out today within a very investable time frame. That's the good news. And I know that you know, you're here today and you're expecting a presentation about investments and portfolios, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't talk about those things. But I think at the core, my main message is that you have to really think about change and how we think about change over time. And very often, even though we are dealing with new things that maybe we're not used to, things like generative artificial intelligence. If anyone on the call has used ChatGPT, you know what I'm talking about. But change occurs over time, of course, but it's measured and it's accelerated by different moments. And we're actually just coming out of a really big moment of acceleration for different things across technology and climate and demographics. And I think it's just a really interesting time to be thinking about forward-looking future investments because, again, the pace of technological innovation and adoption is very much accelerated. So I'm going to skip over slides here for a second and just get to this one, which I think is a lot of fun because you're probably wondering, okay, well, why are you talking about the Goldilocks problem? What is the Goldilocks problem? Everybody here probably has heard the acronym FANG, right? It stands for just some of the biggest and most well-known and innovative firms of the last 20 years, whether you're arguing over different initials, should it be FANG, should it be FANG-M, should it be MANG, because Facebook is now Meta. I guess technically it should be, but FANG kind of rolls off the tongue, so we'll stick with that for a second. I'm going to ask you to play a little bit of a game with me, which is what I like to call Spot the FANG. And we're going to go back into that time machine. We're going to go to 1999. Dave, I did this presentation for a group of interns the other week, and none of them were born in the 90s. And so I had to really set the stage here, and I'm going to do that again because I think it's helpful. 1999, okay? Bill Clinton's in his second term as president. There's a television show called Seinfeld, which is a huge hit, and it's airing its series finale. And more people are starting to use this thing called the internet to buy stuff online. So the trend and focus here is e-commerce. To us, now it's normal. You know, we go on to Amazon and we buy whatever we want, and that's normal to us. But in 1999, it was not. And so let's say you wanted to benefit from this theme of e-commerce. Unless you had a crystal ball here, you were probably maybe you were looking at stock picking, okay? And so the game is this. There's two mystery companies on this slide here. Company A, I'll tell you about them. They were a total stock market darling. They were up 213% on the year back in 1999. Again, this is the past. And they were an online seller of toys. Now, Company B, this orange line here, they were up a modest 22% for what was a pretty strong year for equities, so nothing really to write home about. They were an online seller of books. Now, if you fast forward, you're probably more excited about Company A, right? That 213%. But unfortunately, spoiler alert, game is up. Company A was a company called eToys, which you've probably never heard of because they went bankrupt in 2001. And Company B, that online seller of books, was actually Amazon. They only sold books at the time. Now they sell everything, as we know. But the point here is that it wasn't clear, even to the collective wisdom of the stock market, of those two companies, who was going to be the ultimate winner. But we know that stock picking isn't the only approach to investing. So what if you bought a tech-focused index? Well, from 1999 to today, you would have earned about 5x return on your investment, which is, you know, pretty good. It's a bit of a far cry from what is it that we saw with Amazon, 33x return on your investment, turning a small sum into a large fortune. But still, you know, it's not bad. Problem is that a tech-focused index like the NASDAQ, it just didn't have enough exposure to e-commerce companies because that wasn't really a tech theme back then. It was still the early days. But what if you took an approach where you're getting something a little bit more diversified than one or two stocks, but it's not diluted with other tech. It's just focused on e-commerce companies. So one of the early examples of a thematic index that we have here is the MSCI ACWI Internet and Direct Retail Index. Say that 3 times fast. It would have delivered from 1999 to today about a 17x return on your investment. So if you remember the bears I was showing you earlier, that is the crux of the Goldilocks problem, that sometimes when it comes to investing in a new and emerging theme, a single stock can be kind of, it can have binary outcomes sometimes, and that comes with risk. On the other hand, a broad tech exposure may not be targeted enough to give you exposure to all the companies in the ecosystem of that theme that you're excited about. Now, I'm sure you're saying, okay, Anna, this is all well and good. You know, you're telling me about stories from years and years ago, but what about today? How do we know when something is actually a mega trend and not just a fad like bell bottoms or something of that kind? And I think the good news is for everyone on this call, it's not hard to spot these mega trends. They're all around us. They're on the top of the newspaper if you're still reading a physical newspaper, which I do, or on the top of your Twitter feed if you're looking for a little bit more of a modern spin. And you know what's helpful is, like, if you think about self-driving cars as an example, like, will there be more self-driving cars on the road in 10 years? Yes or no? The answer is probably yes. I think we all kind of agree that that is where a lot of this technology within something like car is going. Actually, fun fact for you, just this year, there were over 200 mass-marketed vehicle models that have some form of automation. I'm not talking about full automation. I'm thinking things as simple as lane change assist technology or self-parking. That's all of which are things that I need when I drive. And so what you start to see is like, okay, well, there are these big trends. I know they're exciting. And what we need to see, in addition to sustained growth, in addition to adoption, is the acceleration coming from three forces in particular. So all of the mega trends that I had outlined, those 5 multicolor buckets, they're all being propelled forward by regulatory, societal, and economic forces. And I'll give you an example of a regulatory one, and I'll stick with the idea of the car, of electric vehicles, of autonomous vehicles. And I'll tell you a kind of an interesting story, or at least I thought it was interesting, which is in China a bunch of years ago, actually, they had this issue that they were dealing with. It was kind of related to the climate. They had a lot of traffic, and because of a lot of traffic, they had a lot of pollution. And so they were like, we need to address both of these problems. We're going to make it harder for there to be so much traffic by placing a limit on the number of licenses, car licenses, license plates rather, that we issue. And so they instituted this lottery whereby if your odds of winning the lottery to get the right to have a license plate were 1 in 2,000, pretty slim. But they didn't set such a rule for the purchases of electric vehicles. It was only for gas-powered cars. So as a result of this regulation, you saw a huge explosion of the number of electric vehicles that people were buying in different cities within China, trying to kind of get around this rule. Now, it wasn't the intention of this rule. It was really trying to limit traffic and lower pollution. But I just share it because it's kind of an interesting example of how sometimes these forces that are underpinning themes are obvious and sometimes they're not. And actually today, it's still true that China is the #1 vehicle, the #1 market for electric vehicles today. And that's just one example, and I could share examples about all of the sub-themes in all of the 5 megatrends, but I just think it's really worth kind of honing in on this idea that in order for something to be mega, it really does need to see economic advancement. It really does need to see technological support, societal preferences for things like clean energy or for AI being able to be a co-pilot for you in your daily life and make your life a little bit easier in order to kind of support that mega growth that you hope to see when you're investing in a theme as well. Now, I'm going to skip around a little bit here because I actually want to take you through each of these megatrends and kind of give you a flavor of what's involved in them. And I'm going to start with technological breakthrough. This one's kind of an interesting one because I think obviously we are all getting used to new tech every day. I mean, I think about the fact that I can order groceries and have them delivered to my apartment. And in 2020, when I first did it, I was like, wow, this is the future. And now it's like, okay, it's been 2 weeks, time to get more milk and eggs. I'm going to get them delivered and it's no big deal. So with tech, it's sometimes it's sometimes the societal preferences that can surprise us here. So actually, Dave, I'm wondering if I can put you on the spot to answer a quick survey question. This is a national survey that was done a few years ago, and they asked people if you had to sacrifice one of these things, either your cell phone, this little black rectangle, or dessert after a meal, or a glass of wine at dinner, or a beer at the ball game. If you had to keep your phone or sacrifice those things for 1 week, what would you rather do? So Dave,
Oh,
I'll put you on the spot. What's your answer?
no problem. So despite my physique saying how much I love dessert and a good beverage, I would definitely not be able to live without my phone. That would be a big challenge for me. So
Yeah, and you'll find that the survey results were very similar. I'm in the same boat as you, Dave. I mean, I would maybe give up my work phone for a week, but I want my personal phone, that's for sure. And I just think that that's such an important shift. It's little, it's funny, but it really represents this huge change. I mean, our caveman ancestors were willing to do a lot of things for sugar or even alcohol, and this little black rectangle that we've only had in our pockets for like the last decade and a half or so have really changed the way that we make decisions and live our everyday lives. So it's not just about advancements in technology that we have to keep an eye on. It's also the changes in our own priorities. But by the way, the increasing speed at which these new technologies are taking hold also means that we're getting increased digital surface area, right? Like by the next year, we're going to have about 75 billion internet connected devices. And they won't all just be cell phones and laptops. It'll be new things that weren't so quote unquote smart before that we're making smart, using things like AI, using things like an internet connection. So believe it or not, things like internet-connected robots, internet-connected grocery shelves, internet-connected street lamps, and parking meters. And that's all well and good, but the issue that sometimes arises is with more digital surface area, you're also opening more doors and windows for bad actors. So that's where a sub-theme like cybersecurity comes in, and where a thematic investment is not just about trying to capture outsized returns, but also investing in the companies that are creating a safer cyber tomorrow, not just for us, but also for our kids. I think that's something that a lot of us get a little bit nervous about. And that kind of brings me to something that, oops, wait, going a little too fast. Hold on. There we go. Nope. Slides are slippery. There we go. It brings me to something I like to call the mega rule, or the mega rules rather. There's 3 of them, only 3, I promise. And the first one is really about thinking about the size of companies that you want when you're making a thematic investment. Obviously, you want to own the S&P or some sort of broad equity index at the core, and that's something that Dave and I know his team are going to be thinking about when they're investing for you. But when it comes to making room for a thematic investment, you don't actually want to double down on those mega cap names necessarily, because if you look at 2001 to 2021, there's only one company that's still in a top 5 position over that time, and it's Microsoft. And I'm of the opinion that they'll be in 2041 in that top 5 position in the S&P 500 as well, but who knows what the other 4 are going to be, or even if Microsoft will be up there. So just making room for the potential next mega cap winners in a thematic investment is an important thing to keep in mind when you're evaluating how you want to invest in these themes. Now, I'm going to move over to demographics and social change for a second. We're going to flip the coin rather. This image I think is really interesting here on the right, because believe it or not, this year, 2024, it's a pretty interesting demographic shift for us here in the US. We have more people for the first time ever over the age of 65 than we have children under the age of 15. If you were to go back 100 years ago, we had 6 times as many children under the age of 15 as adults over the age of 65. And that's not necessarily hard to figure out, right? We've come a very long way in terms of our healthcare and the medical innovation that's taken place over that time. But the reality of having older populations is you need to have a lot more spending on healthcare. And the good news is we live in a world with with things like brain mapping and genomics and immunology. And all of those things I think are only going to see increased demand, because the reality is the bright side is we get to live longer and healthier lives, but it's also on us to make sure that that last part, healthier, is there. And as you get older, the prevalence of age-related diseases, neurodegenerative conditions, things like dementia, or even things like cancer kind of start to rise. And so when I'm thinking about this megatrend, I really think about aging populations in the form of, okay, well, what are we going to do about it from a healthcare perspective? So maybe not where you thought I was going with that megatrend, but something that I think is incredibly relevant and increasingly so. I'm going to switch over to rapid urbanization now. And that's one that I think people kind of scratched their heads at during the pandemic. They were like, okay, Anna, rapid urbanization, there's a typo. I'm pretty sure you mean rapid de-urbanization, because everybody's leaving the city and they're going to the suburbs. But I would argue, well, that's kind of a little bit of a short-term view. And actually, when you think about it, a lot of cities outside of San Francisco and New York saw huge gatherings of people moving into their surrounding areas. And so it's actually kind of a bit of a myth. But when I show you this map, you'll realize why this is a global megatrend. It's because we're seeing cities like Dhaka, Shanghai, Delhi, Cairo, all expected to add between 1 and 10 million people over the next 10 years. So these are cities that need to really build their infrastructure from scratch, while we over here in the US have things like the $1.2 trillion Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act to just rebuild our existing infrastructure. A fun fact for you is that the average age of a bridge in the US is 46 years old. So those capital improvements definitely underway. If you're in a developed market, it's a little bit about rehabbing existing infrastructure. But if you're in somewhere like Dhaka or Shanghai, I mean, these are cities that are really leapfrogging in terms of a lot of their infrastructure build. For example, in Shanghai, like the city is basically cashless. They kind of skipped over cash and skipped over credit cards really, and went straight into like digital payment apps as kind of the main form of transaction. So thinking about the urbanization of places both in the US and outside, I think really qualifies as a mega trend in this context. Climate change and resource scarcity, won't spend too much time on this one because I think we all kind of can understand what this is about, but it's, just to be clear, not necessarily about trying to screen out companies that aren't climate friendly. It's more about trying to find the companies that are helping to innovate in this space. I'm talking about renewable energies like wind and solar technology, as well as things like electric vehicles, where we've made huge strides on particularly one part of that three-force wave, particularly on the economic side. Believe it or not, the cost of things like solar and wind have dropped dramatically over the last 10 years, to the point where it's actually cheaper. Like just this past year, it is now cheaper to build a new wind or solar farm than it is to continue operating existing coal or gas plants. That's a huge shift. So for this one in particular, even though it may make us feel warm and fuzzy inside to do climate-friendly related things, the technology and the economics behind it are really at an inflection point that I think is important to remember. Okay, that brings us to mega rule number 2. We're halfway through. That is to connect the value chain. So this kind of goes back to that story we were talking about with the horse and buggy and the car taking over. It's not necessarily just about car manufacturers. If you like EVs, you have to think about the battery makers, the autonomous software builders, the charging station infrastructure, lithium that's going in those batteries. And so connecting the value chain when it comes to thematic investing can be a pretty good way to spread the risk of picking the wrong horse in the race, so to speak, and kind of bet on the adoption of the theme rather than the winner of the theme, if that makes sense. Okay, this is our last megatrend, emerging global wealth. And this one is really about the rise of middle-class consumers in different parts of the world. Probably my favorite stat, and I've thrown a lot of stats at you today, so thank you. my favorite and stat is probably this one down here. The fact that 44 people escape extreme poverty in India every minute. I mean, that's just I mean, it's great. It's great news. And we know that with an expanding middle class comes more sort of new economies, more activity, more building, and a healthier workforce that can do and be more productive. So I'll share the final mega rule with you, which is thinking beyond your borders, like remembering that it's not just about trends that are happening in the US. You have to really think about who's, for instance, coming online, right? There's pretty much full internet penetration in the United States, but there's approximately 1.4 billion people just between China and India who have never used the internet before, who are coming online now because we have cheaper technology in the form of smartphones. And when you think about the success of the US economy over the last 15 years, a lot of it was coming from new digital ecosystems, things that are coming to China and India at a pretty fast clip, thinking about, you know, people who have never streamed or tweeted or bought something online. They're all starting to do that now, and there's definitely an investment implication for that. So even though I love the US, we don't have a copyright on innovation. I think that's an important thing to consider when you're investing thematically. So, okay, we've talked through all the mega trends. I'm a fast talker, so I think it's a miracle that I got through it in 32 minutes. We went through all of them one by one. We talked a little bit about how to think about investing in them, including the mega rules of the road, if you will, making sure that you own the right weights of companies, the right sized companies to make room for future mega caps. That you're connecting the value chain. You're not trying to bet on one horse. You're owning the picks and shovels, kind of mixing analogies there, but you know what I mean. And thinking beyond your borders when it comes to opportunity and innovation, because there's a lot of exciting things happening around the world that can impact themes that we feel pretty good about, whether it's electric vehicles or cybersecurity. So I'll end with this image, which is, you're probably wondering, okay, why does she have a picture of an astronaut on the screen here? And the reason is this: when America went to the moon, way back when, it was an investment in the future, and it created a lot more than I think anyone could have imagined. Believe it or not, it's the origin of solar panel technology, of heart monitors, of wireless electronics more generally. And so when you're thinking about investing in these mega trends, I think there's just a lot to be excited about, and we don't always know exactly how it plays out. But as the world is accelerating towards the future faster and faster, so a lot of these thematic investments can help us feel like we might be able to get there faster and get there first. So with that, let me pause, stop sharing my screen, and then Dave, if there's any questions that came in or you want to cut it there, just let me know.